So we've got our do not draft list. This doesn't mean never under any circumstances are we drafting these guys. It's kind of based on what we expect ADP to be. Players that probably just aren't going to be on our teams. Jamey's got a whole big list of old guys. You each gave me 3 very extensive lists. I took 4 names from each list. So here's Jamey's list. I want to know if Heath or Dave disagree with these names. James Conner is going to be 30 years old in May. He was RB 11 overall and RB 15 per game. And he had 2 injured games, would have been a top 12 running back per game if you remove the 2 injured games for James Conner. So Conner, Mike Evans, who was 11th per game in PPR, 6th per game in non-PPR. Mike Evans. Davante Adams, who was 12th per game in full PPR, 13th per game in non-PPR. And Travis Kelce, tight end. Actually, this is kind of interesting, the difference between full and non-PPR for Kelce. 12th per game in non-PPR, 7th per game in full PPR, because he only had 3 touchdowns, but did have 97 catches. So it's James Conner, Mike Evans, Davante Adams, and Travis Kelce. Any disagreement on this from Heath or Dave?
I think this is a good time to add the caveat that, like, we don't actually know what ADP is going to be, and I would draft any player we're going to talk about at the right cost.
Okay. Sorry, Heath. Go.
No. So, like, I mean, if we could maybe for reference talk about where they were drafted in the drafts we've done so far.
Mm-hmm.
Like the one in particular that we've seen fall a lot, I feel like, is Travis Kelce, because people don't know for sure if he's going to play. If people are going to draft him as the 7th or 8th highest tight end after round 6 or 7, then I'm probably still fine with that.
Okay, so I'll give you where they went. James Conner round 3, James Conner round 6. James Conner round 6. Mike Evans round 3. 12-team PPR, by the way. Davante Adams round 6. Travis Kelce round 8. So in order, it was Evans round 3, Adams in round 6, Conner a little bit later in round 6, Kelce in round 8. How about Jamey? Do you, at those prices, would you be in on any of those 4?
Probably all but Evans.
Okay. So you thought it was fair for them to be round 6.
And this was without
rookies. If you're getting these caliber of players at this spot, I just don't think that's going to be realistic. Maybe outside of Kelce, depending on when we're, considering these drafts, because I think Heath nailed it. But you also have Adams. The uncertainty. I think once he ends up with the team, he will not be a round 6 pick.
Okay, and he was just at the beginning of round 6. All right. So anybody more bullish on these guys?
I want to see where Davante Adams ends up, and if he's got the opportunity to get double-digit targets per game like he's done. Last year he did it, and the year before in Vegas after Josh McDaniels got fired, he had that. It'll be a little inconsistent, but I could see myself going with Adams as a round 5-ish type of settle for wide receiver.
Could Adams and Rodgers, Adams, I guess, back 2 and Rodgers for the first time go to Vegas?
I'd be very surprised if they brought Adams back.
I don't know their cap situation either, and if they can do that, because it'll be expensive for Adams. It won't be for Rodgers, I think. I think Rodgers, the tab on Rodgers is being paid for by the Jets this year. So Rodgers kind of gets to pick where he wants to go, and Adams could follow him, or Adams could go to New Orleans and try it again with Derek Carr.
The Raiders have the 2nd most cap space.
That helps their cause for sure.
$95 million.
So all of these guys, except for Kelce, had good years. James Conner, 4.6 yards per carry, very good advanced metrics. Again, he would have been a top 10 running back per game, if not for the 2 games he left early. I don't really know if he has a lot of competition. I mean, we like Benson as a name. He didn't really do much. He didn't really have much of an opportunity. He's basically a workhorse who was on pace. If you remove the injured games, he was on pace for 50 catches and 1,765 total yards. And it's 2 years in a row now where he's been really good and really efficient for the Cardinals. Evans, top 12 wide receiver again, although definitely much, much better after Chris Godwin got hurt, but Godwin's coming back from a serious injury. Adams.
If he's back at all.
Yep. Adams, top 12 wide receiver per game. It just barely. On pace for 171 targets. On pace for 176 targets with the Jets. He had a better statistical season than he did in 2023 when a lot of his metrics were pretty crummy. But still, like, you could see he's not the same player he used to be. Kelce has, Kelce's so obvious right in front of our faces. We can see he's just not the same player he used to be. But yeah, where are we on the other guys? Where are we on all of them, Heath?
Well, I was just going to say, like, even the Kelce one, he was much closer to tight end 4 than he was to tight end 8. Like, with 3 touchdowns, he was 1.5 points per game better than Mark Andrews and Sam Laporta. So I think there's a pretty good case that if he plays next year, he could be better than he was this year. But Evans in particular, I was really high on this past year. And it kind of seems like from our early drafts that people might be about where I was on him last year now, and I will be out if that's the case.
Does it bother you that 27% of his PPR total came from touchdowns?
Sounds a lot like Mike Evans.
Well, if you just look at the differences between Evans and Kelce, Evans still gets so many end zone targets, and that's actually gone away for Travis Kelce. He has 12 end zone targets in his last 2 seasons combined. In 2022, he had 10. And another thing that really concerns me is, like, look at how bad he was. He averaged 4 targets per game the first 3 games of the year when Rashee Rice was healthy. And then toward the end of the year, when Xavier Worthy started taking over, Kelce wasn't really that good. So when they're both on the field, yikes. And what do? They bring back Marquise Brown? I don't know. So I don't think anyone's going to argue with Kelce in round 8 or 9, round 8, where he went in this last draft. But, Jamey, of the 4, who are you concerned about just completely falling off a cliff and being basically useless, if any of them?
Useless?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to be completely useless. The one that probably concerns me the most, assuming Kelce plays, because clearly that's the biggest detractor for him right now, is probably Connor, just because of his age and his position. I know we got, sort of, I don't want to say lucky, but we got away with, these guys having very productive years at their ages, Connor and Jones, and obviously Derrick Henry in particular, as they, either turn 30 during the season, or in the case of Henry, turn 31 at the end of the season. It just doesn't happen year over year for these guys. And so at some point, Father Time is going to catch up to them. And in the case of the receivers, I think Heath has a great working theory of, when they start to show you that they're declining is really the time to buy into them declining. Bill Belichick also has a pretty good theory as well that, you want to get out a year before it's, a problem. And, so I was probably 50-50 on some of these guys across the board, between the older players, because I'm probably the biggest ageist that we have. And look bad on some of these guys, obviously, in the case of how they finished. Evans missed 4 games last year. At what point does that hamstring injury pop up again and it becomes a bigger problem? Davante Adams got sort of rescued going back to Aaron Rodgers. If he has, another quarterback change, another system change, he's not the focal point of the offense. How much worse does he start to look at his age? So they're all concerning to me. I don't think they're all going to just completely be terrible. I think we'll have some half a season maybe of quality production and half a season of why did I draft these guys. I don't think we're getting like DeAndre Hopkins out of these guys, those type of performances, or hopefully not Cooper Kupp, where there's injuries and then just poor performance.
Is there anybody on the show that could see a path to taking any of these 4 older players with a top 50 pick?
I think Evans is definitely going in the first 50.
Would you take him with the top 50?
Oh, I'm not. No. I shouldn't say that. I think round 4 is an okay spot to buy into Evans, depending on what happens with Godwin. Because if they bring back Godwin and then McMillan's still a factor, and then you factor in age, like we're starting to see maybe what we saw at the beginning of last season when they were working in some other guys, and Evans just wasn't as productive to start the year.
Yeah,
he was still good. He just wasn't elite.
If he's there at the 4 or 5 turn, I'm going to do a dance of joy. It won't be, but yes.
And I can see based on ADP, because we know how people still get nostalgic for names. Like if Adams, Dave, you brought up I think 2 scenarios over the course of the last couple of weeks. One being Green Bay, one being New Orleans. So going back to the Packers and maybe being their number 1 guy there is, you sort of suggested, and then New Orleans makes some sense because they have, a need for receivers and the car connection. So if either of those 2 situations where he's walking in as the number 1 guy, because he would be in those 2 cases, then I think people get overexcited and overdrafted.
Right. But I don't know if I would take Davante in that round 4 range. In either.
I'm not saying you would. I think people would. I'm not saying you.
Right. But my question was asking my fellow countrymen here on the show about whether or not they would do it. And maybe I'll end up taking Mike Evans with the top 48 pick after all. Maybe Heath's right that like that round 4 or 5 turn is a good place to get him. And obviously, if Davante Adams ends up in a good spot, that's going to be the same exact range. I will end up falling in love for James Conner as a round 5 pick, just to be that settle for RB2. He's had at least 15 PPR points per game 4 straight seasons. I don't think he should. I would have to go back and watch, and maybe Adam, you can jog my memory. I don't know if he showed that like he's slowing down as a player, and that's just all about touchdowns for him. I think he can still contribute if he's in that position where he can be the main running back for Arizona, whose offensive line I think will get better this offseason.
Connor spent a lot of his career behind some of the worst offensive lines in football. The end of his Pittsburgh tenure, the beginning of his Arizona tenure, and it was a little bit better just according to PFF, and just according to PFF last year. He is not an explosive player. Now, we have a metric on True Media called explosive run rate, and it's runs of 12 or more yards. And he actually ranks pretty high in that. But I think that if you want to use the word explosive, I don't really view 12 yards. It's all whatever you want. It's subjective, right? If you want to talk about like 30-yard carries, you don't get a lot of those. He's not running away from people. He hasn't been for either of the last 2 seasons, but he's a productive running back who doesn't have a lot of bad carries. He moves his balls forward. He stays ahead of the sticks, that kind of player.
Gets touchdowns.
Gets touchdowns. He's on the field a lot. So in that regard, I wouldn't call him an explosive player. He's not making a lot of big plays, but he's also, not making a lot of negative plays.
I do think, though, you're selling him you're talking about him like a plotter.
No,
he had a 53-yard carry last year. He had a 44-yard carry the year before. He's averaged YPC for life 4.7 yards per carry over the last 3 seasons.
I'm very complimentary of him. I'm not selling him short. I'm just saying he's not a guy who has a lot of long runs. He doesn't do that very often. If he had 2 runs last year, more than 20 yards. I could be wrong about that. 2 or 3.
I'll check. I'm on it right now.
Yeah, I might be confusing him with J.K. Dobbins because I was looking up his stats on him because we're going to talk about him later. We have to take a break. Sorry. Take a break. I want to come back and just talk about wide receiver age in a moment. We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today.
We dig it. Do you? The Pro Volleyball Federation on CBS and streaming live on Paramount Plus.
James Conner had 2 carries longer than 23 yards last year on 236 carries.
6 carries of 20-plus yards.
No, well, he had 4 carries of 20 to 23 yards. He had 2 really long carries. That's all I'm saying. I don't want to nitpick too much. He ain't Jahmyr Gibbs. I think we can all agree on that.
I think you've done a really good job of illustrating, when you're having this type of discussion, it matters so much where you're setting the line at. We use True Media for a lot of things. They have something called explosive run rate.
You think a 13-yard run is an explosive run?
Well, I don't have a stat called explosive run rate.
I'm just
our stat provider does, and that's how they classify it. And you're not even saying a round number like 20 because he had too many 20 and 21 and 22-yard runs.
It's not that many.
We're going to use this ridiculous number of 23 yards or longer.
That's not what I'm doing.
No, you specifically said that you chose that number because he had carries of 20 to 21 or 22.
Dave asked me if he had slowed down or whatever. I was just giving context on the kind of rusher that James Conner is, and you're nitpicking and picking apart everything I say, which is
I'm not at all.
And I'm just saying he's not someone that has a whole bunch of big plays. He's not a big play guy. He's very productive running back in his own way, but he's not a super fast guy who's running away from people. Who would disagree with that? That's exactly what he is.
I was not nitpicking you. I'm saying that when we talk about stats, this is what we do. We choose our own line to make our own point.
I'm just not making a point about him. I'm not criticizing him. I'm not saying. Do you think he's an explosive player who's creating big plays all the time?
No, but he's not a plotter either.
No, I never said he was.
And ultimately, he gets the job done. He's top 10, or at least last year, he was top 10 in success rate among qualifying running backs. That means that he would either convert first downs or take a 1st and 10 play and get half the yardage needed. Same thing with the 2nd down play. He was good. He was functional. And as long as he's getting the same amount of opportunity this year as he got last year, and he avoids getting hurt, it's really easy to buy into James Conner with a round 5 pick. And then if you want to back him up with Trey Benson, that's not going to be expensive either. I think it's a decent strategy to keep in mind if you go receiver heavy with your first 4 picks.
All right. Speaking of receivers, Evans and Adams are both going to be 32 years old this year. Adams already is 32 years old. He turned 32 on Christmas Eve. That really does seem to be like the kind of a fall off the cliff type of year. And we just saw DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen play in their age 32 seasons. There are some really good age 32 seasons, but I think going back, you could find a big difference between age 31 and age 32. Look at Keenan Allen, look at Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson. These guys were great at 31. I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think they were necessarily great at 32. So this is worthy of Julio Jones, another guy, worthy of more research, but 32 is a dangerous year, and Adams and Evans are both going to be 32.
Is it 32 or is it 10 years of playing football and then your body's starting to wear down?
Yes.